Hey, gang, as a pastor, I am often asked to officiate at weddings, and you know this. Weddings often happen on Saturdays, which are the one day of the week when my boys, my wife, and I are all home together. And so on Saturdays, we'll often put the boat on the lake and we'll ski or tube or swim. We might get our hands dirty with a house project, or we might just put on shorts and hang out in the backyard together. Whatever it is that we're doing, here's the truth. If you were to look at me, I in no way would look as though I'm getting ready to officiate for a wedding on Saturdays. I'll often be barefoot in a swimsuit out on the lake. I'll have an old grubby pair of work pants on, or tennis shoes, shorts, and a t-shirt there in the backyard. And so on Saturdays, when I have a wedding, there's a sort of transformation that happens, a makeover, if you will. Before I go and officiate at a wedding, like Clark Kent becoming Superman, it's off with the swimsuit, the grubbies, or the shorts, and on with the suit and tie and dress shoes. I am transformed. Well, in our reading for today, Paul is suggesting that the Corinthians similarly will experience their own transformation. And let me tell you, it's so much more than a wardrobe change. Everybody, it's so good to be with you. Thank you for joining us for another installment of our study of 1 Corinthians. We've called it The Good Life. And if you have stuck with us, we are almost to the end of the book of 1 Corinthians. We have one more session left after today. But before we get to the final chapter, today Paul, in chapter 15, and the verses for today, 12 through 58, he's talking about transformation, a transformation that will change not just the Corinthians' outward appearance, but the inner reality of who and what we are. Paul is talking all about resurrection, the resurrection we are promised in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Now, hear me, if there is something confusing in this passage, it may be that Paul believed that Christ would return in his lifetime, that heaven would be unveiled, God would reappear, the dead would be raised, and all of creation would be given new life, and that all would be transformed. As he closes his passage, this passage about resurrection, in verse 51, he says, I'm telling you, we won't all sleep. We're all going to be changed in a flash, in a blink of the eye at the last trumpet. It sounds a little strange, to be honest, to our modern ears, but Paul believed that in his lifetime, that all would be transformed. Resurrection would happen. It will be like a flash, like the blast of a trumpet, our decaying bodies becoming undecaying. Our dying bodies will put on immortality. Again, Paul believed this transformation would happen in his lifetime. Today, maybe unlike Paul, as followers of Jesus, we live in a state of what I would call already, but not yet. As followers of Jesus, we live knowing that God and Jesus inaugurated the kingdom of God in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus some 2,000 years ago. But we believe that God's work is not yet completed. We have a future hope that one day God will transform the entire world. And until then, we get to be agents of God's peace and justice and love. This may be why Paul closes with a strong appeal to the Corinthians. In verse 58, he says, be firmly fixed, unshakable, always overflowing with the Lord's work. What is Paul getting at? He's saying to the Corinthians that even though you will be transformed when Christ returns from the dead, keep on keeping on. Keep doing God's good work. Keep being agents of God's peace, justice, and love. You see, I think Paul knew that for far too long, many Christians have been content sort of separating out the future hope we have in Jesus from our present responsibility. Christians are often content with the belief that because God has our future in God's hands, well, then The present doesn't matter. What I do, what happens to the world, God's got it all covered. So what I do and what we do here and now, it doesn't really matter. You see, this is precisely what Paul refuses to allow the Corinthians to believe or do. We simply cannot discount the present life, our present body, the present world as irrelevant. Because remember this present world and your present life, God paid the ultimate price for it. So I've got a couple questions for you. Paul talks a lot about resurrection in chapter 15 because, well, the Corinthians, like us, well, we've got a lot of questions about the resurrection. Here's my question to you. What questions about resurrection, about heaven and the afterlife do you have? And secondly, where do you see Christians tending to not take responsibility for the world and their lives today, believing that God's got the future covered, so what we do doesn't really matter all that much? There's not a lot that you and I can do about it. Where do you see that happening? Thanks for tuning in, gang.